This is episode 180 of the InnerFight podcast with 2015 CrossFit Games athlete Phil Hesketh. Welcome to the InnerFight podcast. My name is Michael Smith, founder of InnerFight.com. In this podcast, we bring you InnerTalks 6 and a special question and answer format with our own coach, Phil, who went to the 2015 CrossFit Games and shares with us pretty much an experience of a lifetime. No matter where you are in the world, thanks for listening. Let's jump right in. I think the first question that everyone's probably wanting to hear the answer to is, what was that moment like?
On? Yeah. Okay. I don't know, I've been asked that so many times. It's just such a surreal moment. I kind of knew when I went over the line, because I looked around and saw who else had gone over, and I was sure that I had qualified, but I just didn't want to celebrate till they put it on the leaderboard, because I think in one of the previous events they had messed up the score and put me in 5th when I was actually in 6th place. So I was like, I couldn't celebrate until I'd seen it on the leaderboard. But yeah, it was just I don't know, I didn't really know how to sum it up at the time, just jumping around with Steve.
What did you think though, mate? What was going through your mind? Like,
just so happy to finally achieve that goal. Like, since I started, I've always wanted to qualify for the CrossFit Games, and I think everyone kind of does, but a lot of people don't know, and myself included, whether it's just like, is this something that is a bit of a pipe dream? Like, am I actually good enough? You know, until this year, I'd never won like even a local competition. I'd always just been kind of building my way up. So to finally this year's just gone really well, like everything that I've done. So to finally achieve that was just like unbelievable. Just yeah.
Going back to 2012, because I mean that's when it really started, when you're on a team. Did you ever have a dream or a vision that one day you'd be one of those individuals at regionals having qualified for the games?
Yeah, well, in 2012 it was just like I'd been doing CrossFit for about 4 months, and I came. So in the Open in Europe, I was 198th out of however many thousand people, which obviously is nowhere near good enough to qualify as an individual. So I went on the team, and we didn't do too well. We didn't have a good enough team to really make an impact, but it was just good watching like all the individuals there and thinking like, you know, I want to be good enough. But at the time, I just knew that I definitely wasn't good enough. Like right then, it wasn't one of those things like, okay, I can definitely do this. You know, right now I'm good enough. But then it was just like that year, I was still working like a full-time job doing some stupid computer thing that I hated, and I pretty much, got kind of asked to leave / I left, because they could clearly tell that all I wanted to do was like go and train and talk about training and think about training the whole time. So that kind of stopped, and then it was just trying to get a job, you know, in the industry so that I could train all the time. And then each year it just got more and more serious for me, qualifying in 2013 and doing way better than I expected, coming 14th, and then again moving over here and improving each year.
How does that work, mate? You're sat in an office job looking at a computer screen.
Yeah.
You didn't get fired or whatever, but like, was all you were thinking about this thing that you just found called CrossFit and competing? Because it's a very difficult balance what we've got here. You've got to pay your bills. CrossFit's not a professional sport, but you've got to train. Yeah. Like, how did you deal with that?
It's difficult because people say, well, it isn't a professional sport because it's not my full-time job, but you kind of have to treat it that way, which is really difficult. Like, you hear a lot of the time in any sport, like the semi-professional level is often like regarded as like the hardest, because they have to support a full-time job but expected to perform like professionals. So, you know, this sport's really getting to the point where, like, obviously you can see on the video like what you have to be able to do. So you have to really like manage your time well and sacrifice a lot of things and dedicate a lot of time to being like a professional athlete and also holding a job. Like, I'm obviously fortunate that you've got a job in the industry, so it makes it a little bit easier. easier that way.
Before we open up to the floor, mate, you spoke then about sacrifices that you've had to make. And I know there's been many. If you put it down to like one of the hardest things and one of the things that you've chosen, because it's a choice, you've chosen to go without, what is that except ice cream?
It's just like,
which I know.
I don't know, for the last sort of 2 years, you get dealt with being called boring for your whole life. You know, every single time you're out with someone, Phil, why are you being boring? Why are you being boring? Then they continue to drink more and more when you drink less, and they think you're being even more boring, when actually they're probably just being a bit of a dick. But you get made out to be the bad guy for being boring, and it's just like every single time, you know. So it's just things like that, just, you know, dealing with that, not feeling the pressure of that, which obviously sometimes you do. You think like, you know, am I just this, you know, boring person that has no life? And then you get to achieve something like this, and you're stood in the middle of the tennis stadium with all these people surrounding you, like, having an absolute time of your life, and you're like, well, glad I didn't go out drinking for the last 2 years, and got over that when I was 18 years old, so.
That's a pretty good answer. Jonesy has a couple of mics. Guys, this is for you. Ask questions, stick your hand up. Jonesy will throw a mic at you. I think actually Jonesy has a question to open with.
I think I do.
Okay.
Okay, firstly, Phil, congratulations on getting to the games this year. It was a longer season than usual. Yes. I noticed during the Open, you're a bit of a madman, okay? Like, I think it's just nerves. And then the regionals pop up, and you're, I think, maybe a little bit worse. I noticed when you're going to the Worlds this year, you're a little bit more relaxed. Why is that?
Yes.
And is it possible for you to be more relaxed throughout the whole year, next year? Or?
Probably not, no. Like, okay. The Open was a lot of pressure this year because I don't know if everyone knows how it worked, but everyone in the Middle East and Africa had to do the 5 qualifiers, and you did that at your own gym, and it's kind of like, it's hard because you're only competing against the people in your gym. You don't get to see, you know, in front of you what everyone else is doing. You just wait for it all to come up on this leaderboard. So like those weekends where you just sat pressing refresh, and then you see your name drop one place, you're like, oh, shit. Like, and press it again, it drops again, you get really upset. So that's pretty stressful. But then, once that was over, it's all good. Like, I was pretty safe in the top 10. But regionals this year was really stressful. Like, so just after the Open, I was like, I had to like go and sit down with Marcus, and he could obviously tell that like something wasn't right with me. Like, I wasn't focused on my job, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, and he asked me like what I wanted like this year, or what I wanted in the future, and I just said like, I want to go to the CrossFit Games. He said, yeah, okay, I know that, but like, how are we going to do it? So we sat down for like, I don't know, 2 hours, probably supposed to be about a 10-minute meeting, and just talked how, you know, we can work things around work so that I can get all the training done that I want to do, and try and take away some of this like added stress that I felt I had. Which obviously like helped so much leading up to it. So I was able to do all the training that I wanted to do. Got to regionals and I felt really good. I felt like I had those top 5 spots, and I felt like I could be a contender for the 5th place. I kind of knew in my head that the top 4 spots were not definites, but the 4 guys, I felt that they had a pretty big claim on those 4 spots, but the 5th place was up for grabs. So obviously with 1 spot available, that's pretty stressful, but managed to get through that. And then once I did, I felt like there was just a lot of pressure just like taken off my shoulders, and I could really enjoy the experience of going to the games. No one had a clue who I was at the games. Like, no one knew who Hesketh was. I was the last number. 59 was the last number, so, you know, you're almost going into it ranked last, which was fine. Like, there was no pressure, and I could just really enjoy the whole experience. But as in terms of next year, I think I'll be even more stressed, because I think like the pressures, if anything,
right.
I know. If anything, though, I've had to deal with this year just kind of being under my own pressure, like the pressure that I put on me, and then a few people know that I was kind of good enough. Whereas this year, you now have to deal with expectation, which I didn't have last year. So you have to deal with people expecting you to get to the games, and if I get anything less than 5th place, the question will be, well, why have you done badly? Not, you came 6th place, well done, which it might have been this year. I don't know if you see the difference there. So there's probably going to be even more pressure, but I'll try and relax as much as possible. You're a very relaxing person to be around, so.
Yeah, I know.
Any questions? Stick your hand up. Jonesy will bring you a mic.
Hey Phil, I just want to ask a couple of questions. So the commentators at CrossFit Games mentioned your rugby background a lot. I wonder if you could sort of talk us through that a bit and how that might have carried over into CrossFit. And the other one, if you can talk us through Murph, it looked like a pretty brutal event.
Yeah.
And what have you done with the weighted vest?
It's down there if you want to put it on. I think the rugby was literally the only piece of information they had on me, like I said. So they didn't really care too much about getting any extra information. Just like, he plays rugby, we'll just mention that every single time. They somehow related rugby to carrying a sandbag. I've never actually carried a sandbag during a rugby match, but whatever. Guess it's kind of similar. But yeah, I think that's a pretty decent background to get into CrossFit. I think you have to have a background in sport. I think it's very hard to come into CrossFit without a previous sporting background, just because of just athleticism, being able to like perform just random tasks that you kind of, from a young age, just always done some sort of sport, whether it was like whatever, since I was like 5, 6 years old, I always wanted to do some sort of sport. So you kind of pick up just random things along the way, and you learn all the basic stuff like coordination and agility and things like that, and I think that really helps coming into CrossFit. The rugby especially helped with my strength. Like, I was pretty strong when I first started, like 3 or 4 years ago. I could kind of like, I think I could back squat like 140, 150 on my first session, which is obviously like decent, but just super inflexible. Like, I couldn't overhead squat a PVC pipe on my very first session, and no one believes me. I tell people whenever they're struggling with it, I couldn't do that. I'm like, yeah, whatever, Phil. But I genuinely couldn't overhead squat a PVC pipe, and you had to work really hard. So rugby was really good, but rugby with like a really good strength and conditioning coach who keeps you flexible and keeps you like the training methods quite current would be a lot better. I think what I did was pretty old school and just go to the gym with your mates and do bicep curls and try and get massive guns, and that really doesn't help your shoulder mobility. So, but yeah, I think rugby is pretty much one of the best backgrounds you can get, or American football. Like,
what about wrestling?
Wrestling? Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty that's pretty good. Like, as a background or just in general?
What about Murph, Mike's second part to the question?
Oh yeah, that was the most miserable, one of the most miserable experiences. Like, I couldn't enjoy any part of it. Like, there was no time during that workout where you're like, okay, I'm just going to soak in all the atmosphere and enjoy this. Like, you kind of could with a workout. Like, it was just so miserable, and like, it was actually, I was really mad at myself afterwards, because the whole time I was looking at the clock and thinking like it doesn't matter, because you get time capped, and you don't have to push any harder because it's your first game. No one's expecting you to do anything too important, and it was just like a really bad like mental attitude. I knew that I was in a lot of pain, I was suffering, and I wasn't doing well. I could see people just pushing further and further ahead of me, and I was just kind of letting it happen. I wasn't working hard enough to stop that happening, and I don't know if I could or if I was just absolutely smashed. Like, I was doing like 5 squats and then getting down on the floor and just putting my head on the floor because I didn't have any water. I forgot to take water out with me, which was stupid. Like, everyone else was carrying a bottle of water and I didn't do that. I'm usually pretty prepared with things like that, and just the weight vest, because it was 2 flat metal plates, it just felt like it was compressing you back to front the whole time. So like, just even stood up breathing was like, it was just really miserable. And then the heat, even though from here I was like, I'm going to be super prepared. And the guy from Iceland wins the event, and I was on the floor. I was on the floor crying about the heat. Like, it was the most miserable I've ever been in the heat, even doing stuff out here. I think it's because we were close to the floor. It felt like it was just bouncing off back into your face. But yeah, that was a hard event, but I was also really mad at myself after that one for like letting myself just go slowly and not worrying about pushing hard. That was probably the wrong attitude to have the whole time during that.
I think Fleur had a question. Sorry, Omar.
Hi Phil, congratulations. I just had a question. I know CrossFit's constantly varied and you've got to be ready for anything, but how did you, when you went into some of those events like the paddle or the pegboard that people have commented on, how did you sort of mentally prepare when you saw that and went, oh, I probably haven't done this very regularly in my training, so I've got to get out there and do that?
Yeah. The paddle was actually, I was really looking forward to that because it meant I wasn't swimming. If anyone knows, I really don't like swimming. I'm not very good at it. I've started practicing it a lot since the games finished, but I think when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was doing swimming lessons, and then I was like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I'll play football. I don't need to be able to swim. And that was I very much regret that decision now. Okay, so if you have kids, make them swim from a younger age. Okay, but the paddleboard was just we got one chance to practice it the day before. We got an hour, and they told us the easier way to do it is if you lie down on your front and just sort of paddle with your arms. But the more advanced way, the pros do is they get onto their knees and use the full body. And so a few people were sort of trying that technique, and you got 2 sort of laps to do it. So maybe 20 minutes of practice time in total. So it just didn't make sense to go for that more advanced technique because you can't feel like you can learn some things in just 20 minutes. So just kind of. I did the sort of the basic technique. It was a little bit slower, but didn't fall off at all, and actually managed to overtake a few people on the paddleboard, and they probably overtook me back on the swim. But then that was pretty cool. The pegboard was weird. I don't want to say it was easy because obviously it wasn't because other people didn't finish it. But I didn't have any issues with it at all. I thought it was pretty okay. I don't know if it was a technique thing that I just figured it out quickly. Or, I managed to have something left in my arms by the end of the weekend. I know a lot of people were really struggling with their biceps from all the pull-ups and push-ups and stuff from Murph. But yeah, that's what I said about playing sports from a really young age, I think really helps with CrossFit. Just getting a task in front of you and being able to just do it is a pretty cool feeling. It's definitely something that I'll try and put into my training a bit more this year. I'll try and ask people, just come up with something random that you don't think I've done before and just see if you can do it. And the chances are you might get to do it at the games, then you've got an advantage because you saw the 1 or 2 people that had paddleboard before or the 1 or 2 people that had done the pegboard before were up and down and won the events by a long way. So whoever's been training the most varied usually comes out on top.
Hello.
Hi, Claire.
You've already talked about the stress around the build-up to the games and regionals and all of that. What I'd like to know is how do you manage that stress and excitement in the minutes and seconds before an actual event starts? And was there any particular event, open, regionals or games, that really had you super nervous?
Well, I used to not be very good at this at all. Lily was in charge of always going and getting both diarrhea and constipation relief tablets because one or both would happen at all competitions. And it was just a gamble of which one I would kind of go with, which tablets I would go with. And that happened for about 2 years. And then after, I actually think it's since moving here, Marcus has been a really big influence in sort of composing myself a lot better at competitions and just mentally being, backing myself more. A lot of the time when I used to compete, the questions running through my head was this is going to hurt, or are you going to finish this event? Things like that, negative thoughts, and it's kind of changed my mentality around a lot to be a lot more positive. I actually think a big turning point this year was when I went and did the athlete games in the UK, and I was probably expecting myself to do quite well. I only decided that I was going to do it about a week before and just went home because there was quite a lot of prize money. and I was way in the lead, like the whole weekend, like from the very first event up until the semi-final. And then I had one bad event in the semi-final, and because they'd sort of rejigged the scoring system around, it meant that I went into second place. So I sat down, I was getting pissed off. I was like, I've been in first the whole time, they changed the scoring system, and now I'm in second. I was just about to go out, and I just kind of had like, I don't know if it sounds stupid or not, but it had like a moment where I was like, don't worry about any of that. Like, you were first the whole time for a reason, because you're better than everyone who's competing this weekend. So you've got 2 more events, and you go out and prove that. And I came, I think, second in the first part of the final and first in the second part of the final, and won overall. And I think kind of since then, like all the competing that I've done, I've just had a much better like mental attitude. And then one more example is like the last workout of the Open. I don't know who did the Open, but it was the rowing and thrusters, the 27, 12, 15, 9. And all I could hear the whole time that it was released was everyone's like, how much this is going to hurt, how much this is going to be painful, and like how bad it's going to be. And I just remember saying to Marcus, like, I can't wait to do it, because like no one is going to put themselves in much pain as I'm going to put myself in this workout, like in our region. Like no one's going to put themselves in that pain. And I actually came second in the workout because there was a random score in Q8 from I can't remember the guy's name. He actually beat me. He beat me by about 30 seconds, but I think it's questionable. So I'm going to say that I won that event by quite a long way. So it just sort of since then I've had just a lot better mental attitude going into any sort of events. I don't really feel that nerves anymore or self-doubt anymore going into things. I still have them, like, just in case, but I didn't use them the whole time at the games, so I was really happy. That was like my first competition without one single diarrhea tablet. It's great.
Johnny.
From the start of the Open to the games, about 5 months. Drugs obviously help a lot in the sport or the sport of fitness. Do you think CrossFit tests well enough at the high level?
Well, they tested at the regionals on the final day. They only tested the top 6 at regionals. So maybe they could have tested the full field. And then they tested everyone at the games. It was only a urine test, so maybe a blood will be more accurate. But I think they test a lot more in like America and over there, because that's where the most guys are. I haven't really heard of them doing random checks around the year, like outside of America. So that's maybe something they could step up a bit. But on that, I don't want to say that anyone is or isn't. I don't know if people are using them, but I feel like people get way too caught up in like, this guy must be doing steroids, this guy. It seems like at the moment CrossFit is like the first people to point out, like, as soon as they get beaten a workout, he must be taking steroids. Like, and if you immediately say that, you're just making excuses for yourself to lose. Like, it's okay, I can lose to that guy because he must be taking steroids, rather than thinking like, I hope that everyone is clean because I want to feel like I can get to be the best at this sport without always having that excuse like lurking, or the only reason I got beat is because of that. So yeah, I hope that they can maybe improve the testing a little bit, maybe do a few more random tests throughout the year. But I'd like to think there was only a few people came back as not clean, 1 or 2 people from the regionals, like throughout the whole world. So maybe it's enough testing, maybe not, but who knows.
I think Chris, you have a mic.
Can you talk a little bit about your training camp before the games and how that helped you, and what kind of level that was compared to the training you did here locally?
Yeah, okay. So 5 weeks before I went for the competition, this was also thank you to Marcus for letting me leave Dubai for 5 weeks, but I went to the UK for a week, and then Mallorca for 5 days, and then I was in America for 3 weeks. And that was with Stephen Fawcett Bjørgvin Gudmundsson and Sara Sigmundsdottir, who those two guys came third, and then Steve was 26th. So obviously in very good company. So the training intensity was super high the whole time. Actual volume of training was probably lower than what I've been doing here, because as the weeks got closer and closer to the competition, you wanted to maybe take that volume down. A lot of people get stressed closer to a competition and think, oh, I should be doing more and more and more, when really you should just be keeping the intensity really high. So everything that you do should be 100%, but take the volume down a little bit so you're not beating your body up too much. But yeah, the whole experience was just unbelievable. We had 3 days with Cameron Nicol, who was an ex-GB world medalist on the Olympic rowing, and he was teaching us about rowing technique for 3 days. I think we got about 60 or 70,000 kilometres done in a few days, so nearly as much as Marcus will do on his own, but we got enough done. And then we went to Mallorca. We had an endurance coach for 4 or 5 days that was just running and swimming. And then when we were in LA, we were on with a specific weightlifting coach, and we were doing all our own training as well. So it was really good to get help from a lot of people. Sometimes what I'm missing is just a bit of help from people. Like when you feel like something's not going right, like definitely not too proud to say that I don't need help from anyone. You can always be better at something. So it was just really good to, like, even little things like rowing, which I felt like I was pretty good at, like 3 days later, and I was huge improvements. So everyone can kind of make the little improvements with just a little bit of help from specific coaching. So that was like 5 weeks of really good stuff. And I got a really, really good tan.
Hey, Phil. Obviously, when you're at the games and the build-up to the games, you have exposure to some of the world's greatest athletes and coaches, and then the games experience in itself. I'm wondering what, from a training side, that experience and that exposure, is there anything that you're going to change in respect to the build-up to the games next year? Is there a different focus or a different philosophy that you think you'll fold into the stuff you already do? And the second question I had is, what misconceptions do we as viewers or fans of the games have about being at the games itself? Like, what are the difference between those misconceptions and the actual experience that you may bridge that gap?
So, training-wise, I feel like I was actually, like, obviously I was doing something right, because what I was doing managed to get me to the games. One big difference I made last year was that I would sort of leave every sort of 2 months and do like a 1 week to 10-day training camp, which puts you just in like a new environment and just changes things up. And I think it's something that everyone can kind of benefit from, no matter what you're doing. Like you get that little bit of a change, and it gives you a big push. And it would be against some of the best guys in Europe, so it kind of gives you that check of where you're actually at. Because sometimes in Dubai we're a little bit sort of excluded from the best guys in the world. So it's good to kind of get amongst that again, which I'll continue to do the whole year again. In terms of actual changes, I've just added in. I got an endurance coach as soon as I got back. As soon as I got back, I text Flanners okay, we need to actually work together this year. So he's been programming 2 running and 2 swimming sessions a week for me, because that's 2 areas where I feel like I can still make like really big improvements that I felt when I was doing those events. I just felt unfit, or I was behind and didn't feel like I could keep up. So that's 2 things that I want to make big improvements on next year. I'd really like, if I do qualify next year, or when I qualify, I want to finish in the top 20 in a swim event and the top 20 or top 15 in a run event. I'd be really happy. What was the second question? It was really long. What? I don't know. It's a tough question. I don't know. Answer. It's quite hard to say. Like when you're actually there, everything just feels sort of more real. I've watched this for like the last 2 or 3 years and seen these guys and thought, these guys are so much far ahead of like where I am, and then you get there and you do the first couple of events, and I got a couple of decent finishes, and it really closes that gap like between how good you think everyone is and how bad you think you are yourself. Like, you kind of close that gap and think, I can compete, and I don't know if I left that a bit too late, so that next year I'm hopefully going to go into it a lot more confident. So from the very first event, I'm going to want to like winning and keeping up with guys rather than allowing people to go past and just be like, Ben Smith just ran past me, it's okay because it's Ben Smith, he's going to win anyway. Like, next year I think my attitude going into it will be a lot different if I qualify. Like, not seeing these names on people's shirts and being sort of intimidated by that, but just being like, whatever, like only concentrate on yourself and actually wanting to win, just like I was at regionals. Like, at regionals I put a lot more effort into winning events than I did just competing, whereas at the games it kind of was more about just competing than feeling like I wanted to win every single event.
Phil, you're speaking a lot about your mental approach, and when you basically changed your mental approach, you really started seeing better results. Firstly, what have you changed? What exercises are you doing to mentally prepare yourselves for these events? And secondly, are you working with a mentor or somebody that's assisting you with this?
I don't know if I do anything like mental exercise or anything like that. I know that I'm a very organised person. Like, before every event, like the night before the event, I would have my whole bag packed for the next day. Like, I don't like to be stressed in the morning. I don't like to forget anything that I need. Like, everything's packed, everything's neat, everything's just ready to go. And I really believe in like visualising, visualising things and then being able to achieve it, so that when you actually get to that situation, you're mentally ready for it. Like, the clip that we watched afterwards from regionals when I was doing the cleans and I walked over the finish line, like that event got released probably 3 or 4 weeks before it actually happened, and the amount of times that I did that event in my head at the actual pace that I probably did it at, so I just sat there for like a minute and 20 seconds or however long it was and just went through the whole thing in my head like over and over and over and over again, so that when I actually got to the event, you just feel ready to do it. Like, and obviously that doesn't always help because you don't always know what you're going to be able to do, but with the things that you can control, like just always visualising yourself every time I crossed the event, and I went over that in my head, I always was going to the CrossFit Games. I never visualised myself doing the 6 cleans and then crossing the line and looking around and not qualifying, because there's no point in doing that. There's no point being ready for that because you don't want it to happen. So I was always visualising myself. I would always qualify. I actually wanted to win the event, but I just a few seconds behind. So I think that's really important, like just visualising yourself doing successful things, and I think that will happen. If you always visualise things in the future being like painful or negative, then you're kind of okay with that happening and that being the reality. As far as a mentor, a bit cheesy, but obviously Marcus has been just a massive help ever since I got here. Like I said at the start, I used to be very sort of negative about things, and he still tells me that I stress way too much about absolutely everything, but that's kind of the way that I do things. I get stressed about stuff and it's okay, but yeah, I don't know if that's going to change too much, but yeah, he's just been a massive help for me in the last sort of 18 months that I've been here.
Phil, it was a very taxing obviously event to get through all that, one after the other. What was your fuel for the day? What were you eating? How did you survive, basically?
So when we went on the training camp, we actually, a guy called Matt came with us, who runs a nutrition company in the UK, who my friend Steve's been sponsored by for like the last year, and he was sort of preparing all our meals throughout the day. It was actually like a really high carbohydrate and protein diet. We were eating about 4,500 to 5,000 calories a day. Like the morning would be about 1,000 calories as soon as you woke up, of porridge or oats, something like that. And then you have the exact same thing just before bed. So it definitely wasn't like a weight loss or fat loss diet, but for performance wise, it was just about getting in those calories, getting in the right amount of sort of macronutrients between proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, so that we were fueled. And then during the actual competition weekend, when a lot of people struggle, it was just about almost force feeding yourself. Like after every event, just going and sit on your own and cool yourself down and just make yourself eat the food. And hydrate as well. One of the best things on the Friday night, I was probably one of the most dehydrated states I've been. We'd done Murph, we did the snatch ladder, and then we did DT. It was all in a pretty short space of time. It was in about 6 hours. So I was probably super dehydrated, and they actually took me in for drugs testing with about 6 other guys. So I sat there I was the first person to leave, and it took me an hour and a half to fill up like a 100 milliliter cup. But in that time, I drank about probably 3 liters of water, and I actually felt pretty great the next day. So I think a lot of people were really struggling after that day. So I think the hydration was super important, and eating the food really important to actually being able to compete for the full weekend. Because I think there was 6 people dropped out of the guys' competition this year, or 5 people from various injuries, or just I think one person dropped out and was in like a really dehydrated state. So just little careless things like that people should really think about more.
Just kind of following on from that, I know when we used to go to competitions, you used to take banana saurine, and Lil make me eat this, and all you lived off was banana saurine. Did you think that eating properly made a massive difference rather than half a loaf of banana saurine in a day?
Yeah, I used to just eat Haribo and stuff as well, and just I just kind of make up the excuse I can't eat, I feel sick, so I'll just eat something sweet, and then performance over the days get worse and worse, and end up just doing badly. And even I've sort of changed. I brought that sort of diet back with me now, and still eating a lot more high calorie diet. And I know that at the moment, me and Matt, we're training 2 separate sessions a day, sometimes 3, and I feel like I've got enough energy to do that the whole day, and to be able to do work and things like that. And I feel fine. Whereas I know that I used to, when I used to eat 3 really large meals in a day, I'd feel great for my morning session, and then I'd eat and I'd feel a bit tired, and then I'd really struggle to get motivated to train again, and then I'd just be starving waiting for my last meal of the day. So I think with nutrition, it's definitely not, what I'm eating isn't for everyone, but it's just about sort of finding what works for you. I know that my diet's completely different to Marcus's or to someone else here that performs at a higher level at whatever you do. So it's just kind of playing around with it and finding what works. But I definitely think that sort of a real high calorie diet with a lot of eating a lot of carbohydrates and spacing that out a lot over the day is working really well for me. Yeah.
Hi. CrossFit prides itself on its feeling of community and people helping each other and cheering each other on and stuff. How was the atmosphere at the games from that point of view, given that you had a lot of very competitive, exceptional individuals in one room that everyone wants to win? What was it like?
Well, yeah, it's just the same as kind of any other competition you go to. Everyone talks about the community and stuff. While you're competing, you don't stop and cheer someone else on. You want to win. It's not that much of a community, especially at that level. You try and win the event first, but then once you've finished, go and cheer someone else on. Sometimes cheering someone else on is it's all good. Sometimes it's a little bit come on, I finished 5 minutes ago. Why are you still going? I think an event like that, sometimes if you're getting cheered on, you're just just shut up and leave me alone. I know I've still got quite a long way to go. Whatever, you finished. Okay, but obviously the same thing happens. You finish, people cheer you on. It was just better there because you had the crowd. I never really experienced a crowd like that before. So especially in the tennis stadium, which was a lot more intense, the atmosphere. It was just really cool to finish an event and people cheering. When I did the sandbag event, it was cool because you were going up and down the stairs. so you were really close to the crowd, and there was like a bunch of people like cheering, and I thought I was like, oh, it must be like Matt or someone. But I looked and I didn't know any of them, so I was like, oh, sound like Matt didn't cheer once. So, so yeah, it was cool just to get like random people cheering you on the whole time, which was really good. Yeah, like it was they had the guys and the girls, they kept us separate in the athlete areas. Everyone just sort of chilling out and talking to each other, and you know, there was no tension between anyone. Like there's no point in that really. Like it was just good. You just kind of had a laugh in between and just kind of enjoyed it in between, because that's not really the stressful part. The stressful part is when you're actually competing, not in between.
Hello. My question is, what are you bringing back to the InnerFight programming from that experience that you had, especially for people like me, for instance?
Want to come swimming?
Sure, if you say so. Like I'm
No, you don't want to come.
I'm not someone who's planning to qualify. I'm just here to get fit and strong. So I think most of people I know are coming for this reason. So is there something that you want to change in the InnerFight programming? And the second question is, Hekmat has, is we're obviously very proud of you to go there and qualify, and I think take Dubai and the UAE's name out. Was there any response from Dubai media or somebody here, to sort of promote you more or talk to you about how you can be associated maybe with Dubai athletes?
First question. Okay, it probably applies more to like maybe the red zone training a little bit, that I've kind of learnt ways to, like, being on my training camps, like especially the higher level gymnastic stuff. I learnt a few things, and the weightlifting and things like that I can apply to people. But then definitely, like, in my coaching in normal classes, I've learnt new sort of cues and things like that I try and help out with. But you kind of got to remember that CrossFit, like at the games, is a completely different experience to just being fit and healthy. And I don't know that it's good that you mix them too much. Like obviously you saw the things that like we were doing. It's probably not that smart to mix all those things in there. So if anything, it's given me an awareness of how certain things, like how your body reacts to certain things, maybe tone down some of the workouts that we program, or make certain things harder. But I think it's probably important to remember that, like, the health and fitness side of it is completely different to the competing side of it. Hikmat, what was your question? I was on Men Health. Did you not read it?
Not on the front cover.
No, they put Mohammed on the front cover instead.
Who's over there at the back?
So Men's Health got in touch, and then I don't know what was the other one.
I think in regards to that question, that Phil got some media coverage, and we got a few calls, and it was like he actually sent me a message. They've given me a choice: should I put the UAE flag or the Great British flag on the thing on the games? And I said to him, what do you want to do? He said, well, I live in the UAE, I'll put the UAE on. And I think that's good, but I think let's not kid ourselves. When Phil qualified, we got 1,000,001 phone calls for different things. Like, this guy trains his ass off every single day, and he has done since he's been here, since we've known him, and we've got very few calls. So I've actually, together, more me than him, have told a lot of people to get out the way. And we've sort of, the people that, and a lot of you guys are here, the guys that have supported Phil since the start, whether you've trained with him, whether you've trained in classes. And I think from both of our perspective, we appreciate this group of people here a lot more than we appreciate someone calling and saying Phil's representing the UAE. Phil's not really representing the UAE. He had the flag there, but it's everyone within his sort of immediate community And you know, the guy from Men's Health comes and trains here, again, within the immediate community that really support this guy, because they see you guys follow him on his Instagram, whatever, what he goes in day out. And all of the big brands, and, you know, I do hope some people listen to this, you know, like, we're not really interested to speak to you when he's done really well. Come and see us sort of when he's starting. And I think it's a lot like that. We have a lot of good people come into our gym. Mohammed's a fine example as well, you know, or an easy example, should I say. You know, we want to support people from the start all the way up and continue. Our attitude doesn't change to Phil, Mohammed, Chris, whoever you are. You know, I remember when this guy first walked in when we were at Evolve, or when you first came into Evolve. So I think, and this isn't a dig at local media or local brands. I know, you know, lots of people don't want to write stories about people when they're just starting out, but for me, that's when the journey really starts. So he made a decision to have the UAE flag, and, you know, I support him. I don't know what I would have done. More questions. We got time for a couple more. One more. Go on.
Where do you see CrossFit going? What's the future of CrossFit?
You just stole my last one.
I don't know how much. It can obviously, it's just get bigger every year. If you look at where it started, like, I think it was 2007, the first games, and I think it was like maybe like $500 for the winner, and they were like, it was just almost just like a local competition is now. It was really small. You didn't have to qualify. You just showed up, and then you look at what it was like this year, and I think the winner was $275,000. So, like, money-wise, it's going to get bigger. Sponsorship-wise, it'll get bigger, and, you know, it was crazy the things that we got given. I came home with, I somehow managed to come home with 100 kilos of luggage. Like, yeah, but we didn't have to pay extra, so that was okay. So that can just get bigger and bigger, but. Like, as well as the judges do, like, I had no issues with judging this year. Everyone always, like, picks on the judges, whatever. It was the judge's fault. I did badly. I had no issues with that. As well as they do, it can never really progress further than just its own, like, private competition, because it's very hard to like standardize everything as one, like, judge. Like, it still goes down to like human interpretation of, like, how deep a squat is, and even though those judges are, like, the best ones in the world, there's still going to be a little bit of variation there. So in terms of, like, people say, oh, it could be, what if it could go to the Olympics, or what if it could do this, like, it probably can't go any further than that without some better way to judge all the movements. I don't know. They have referees, obviously, in other sports, but it's just one referee judging the whole match. I don't think there's other sports with individual referees for the different teams or competitors. So I don't see how that would work. But I don't know if there is a sport like that. But I think it will just. But for the. Okay, maybe, I don't know, but for now, I think it'll just keep growing as its own sort of private competition and get bigger and bigger that way. More and more people entering every year. It'll get harder and harder to qualify, and I think, you know, the tests don't need to get any harder. I think they've kind of figured out how much there is to test. Like 4 days seems to be how much, and, you know, about 13 to 14 events. But I think it'll just get harder and harder to qualify for each year. Like this year, there'll be a whole bunch of new people, like I was this year, who want to be that guy that gets the last qualifying spot. So, you know, it's just going to be tougher and tougher every time.
We're nearly out of time, mate, but I think what everyone's asked a lot of questions, and your response is a lot about sort of personal development and overcoming fears and overcoming, to a certain extent, insecurities. If you could leave us with 2 or 3 final thoughts on, like, you've obviously grown up very fast, you're 24 years old and able to deal with this stuff. People that are struggling to deal with it, be in the exercise arena or be in the work arena or in life, what would you say is 2 or 3 of the key things that help you to deal with this stuff? Because there is a lot of stress, and we've had some nice jokes about it, but is there 2 or 3 things that you could really sum it up with?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is prioritizing things that are really important to you, and then giving everything you've got to make that thing happen. Like, if certain things get in the way, if other people like are negative about it, or you let other people influence what you're doing, you won't get to where you are. Like, it could be very easy to slack off. It could be very easy to go out and for me to go and just be like a normal 23, 24-year-old who goes out partying all the time, but you just wouldn't achieve those things that you want to achieve. So if you have a goal, just be absolutely relentless in achieving it. Do everything that it needs to do. This is something that I can only do when I'm, for the next 3 or 4 years, I think, at this level. Like, so you've got a very small window to do this, and just make it happen during that time.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Phil, congratulations once again. Thank you.